Well, before the last Holyrood election, Nicola Sturgeon made education her priority, asking Scots to judge her on her record and promising to close the attainment gap between children from the least and most well-off backgrounds. Well, as voters prepare to go to the polls once more, tonight we are focusing on education as a key election issue. Catherine Sampson is at a school in Dunoon for us this evening. Catherine.
Yes, Andrea, and it is the end of the first full week back for most pupils across Scotland. Here at Dunoon Grammar, there's some after-school sport going on. Now, of course, with the pandemic, there has been widespread disruption for pupils and for staff, whether that's because of cancelled exams, prolonged periods of home learning. But even before the pandemic, some big questions were being asked about the future of Scotland's education system, once considered to be one of the best in the world. Our political correspondent, Ewan Petrie, kicks off our coverage tonight.
It's been difficult, being at home and that, trying to motivate yourself and keep going really, but being back at school is good.
These pupils return to the classroom full time this week, straight into assessments to help their teachers judge grades. The system has been criticised as exams by another name, adding to the workload of staff. It's also added to calls to end an over-reliance on exams.
I tend to get really anxious and nervous. I think it's such a good opportunity to do well, do like 50% well in half a paper and 50% well and get a better grade.
It's not based on one exam or two exams, it's based on your overall performance of the whole year. So the teachers get to see you, you can do monthly tests.
I think it's a better system than last year. Kind of probably been more prepared for it, so I think it'll be a bit more fair.
Education has been at the heart of plans for the COVID recovery, including calls to recruit more staff to cut class sizes.
It's so frustrating, and even just talking now, it makes me feel like I could cry.
Justine Milne has been on one-year fixed-term contracts since graduating in 2018. Her COVID recovery post is due to end in June. The number of probationary teachers going into temporary contracts is at its highest level since 2007.
And there's not enough jobs there for people to get into the profession and actually get a permanent post. If I'm in this position again next year, going on to my 4th year of it, I think I'm going to have to walk away. It's not about recruiting more teachers. There's plenty of us sitting there. It's a case of find a way of how you're going to make them permanent positions. Push for the smaller class sizes. That would then increase the permanent posts for people, and that would then also help with the COVID recovery.
A survey of more than 2,000 teachers on an online support group agreed the focus should be on teacher numbers.
The number one priority was 66% of the respondents said that it's smaller class sizes above anything else that we really need to make an impact on our kind of teaching and learning experiences, both for staff and for pupils.
Also, I think retention of teachers is a big issue just now. There's thousands of teachers in Scotland that are on 0 hours contracts that could be used, that could be given jobs. And there are also student teachers who have been left in a difficult position, who've been told that they haven't completed enough placement time because of the pandemic to be allowed to qualify.
Closing the gap between the least and most well-off pupils was an issue before COVID. These teachers feel a gulf is opened between them and policymakers when it comes to what's needed to support pupils.
If they feel that their well-being is taken care of, if they feel safe in our classrooms and in our schools, if their mental health is something that we value and we take seriously and we work to address that, then the attainment will come. But we're not being asked that, and even if we are being asked, it doesn't seem like what we're asking is being put in place.
So what would you like to see politicians prioritise when it comes to education?
The absolute priority for me is that social and emotional learning is embedded into the curriculum in Scotland. Let's see the last year as an opportunity. Let's start at the beginning, build the foundations.
It's just not good enough to say, well, we need to get back to normal. If we know normal wasn't working for so many pupils and families, then that's not good enough.
I think this is an opportunity to build something better if we're brave and ambitious and if the country will invest in it.
The SNP says it will invest a further £1 billion to close the attainment gap and recruit an additional 3,500 teachers and classroom assistants. The Conservatives want to recruit 3,000 more teachers and set up a national tutoring programme. Labour would provide every pupil with a personal comeback plan and scrap the Scottish national standardised assessments. The Greens aim to recruit 5,500 additional permanent teachers and reform the SQA and Education Scotland. And the Liberal Democrats guarantee every qualified teacher will get a job and would increase the starting salary to £30,000.
Ian Petrie reporting. Well, joining me now is David Mitchell, who is the head teacher here at Dunoon Grammar. Hi, David.
Hiya.
David, in your view, what would you like to see the politicians prioritise over the next 5 years?
I think for me there are three major points that we need to look at, and the first one has to be our assessment and examination structure. Do all senior young people need to sit an examination at the end of their national qualifications? We've learnt a huge amount this year through teacher professional judgment and continuous assessment, and I think that's something we need to develop further, possibly using higher as the gold standard with some form of assessment at the end of each higher examination, if you like. Secondly, I think we have to harness the new skill that we've learnt through digital learning, the online learning platform. The national e-learning offer that was delivered during the second lockdown was a fabulous resource for teachers, and I think as teachers we need to develop that skill further so that we can support each other across local authorities and across the country. And finally, I do feel we also have to tackle young people's mental health. We've had an awful lot of young people returning to school after the pandemic feeling extremely anxious, and the introduction of school counsellors will be a big help, but I do think we need to do an awful lot more to tackle that problem.
What about the issue of narrowing the attainment gap between pupils from better off and less well off backgrounds? There was frustration from some, I think, in the last term of the Parliament that perhaps not enough progress was being made before the pandemic. Now we're recovering from a pandemic. How realistic is it to set goals for that?
I think schools before the pandemic were doing a lot of work to try and close that attainment gap with the introduction of a number of interventions with some success. Obviously after the pandemic and our 2 school closures, I think schools are going to have to go back and rethink and re-evaluate what they're doing to close that attainment gap, because there's no doubt in some circumstances the pandemic has widened the attainment gap.
In terms of an idea that Scotland was once a world leader in education, the education system, how would you describe where we are now?
I do think we're in a good place. Curriculum for Excellence was introduced to give schools that flexibility to design a curriculum for their own context, and schools have done that particularly well. I do think we maybe need to develop further opportunities for young people looking at modern apprenticeships, etc.
So just very briefly then, if there's one key thing you think needs to change, what's your
I think
message?
I go back to my first point, and that is the examination process. I think we have to have an open and frank conversation to develop a structure that's going to meet the needs of our young people.
David Mitchell, thank you so much for speaking to us.